GB News with The Mark Stein Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
A very good morning. This is To The Point on GB News with myself, Mercy Moroki, and Inaya Falarin Iman. We're on your TV, radio and online.
We're with you until midday, looking back, discussing today's biggest political and social stories with our expert guests and getting your views as well as ours.
Yes, and if you want to get your views in, you can get them in on our email, gbviews@gbnews.uk, and we'll get to those throughout the programme. But first, here's your latest headlines.
Good morning, it's 10 o'clock. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. Liz Truss says negotiations for a post-Brexit free trade deal with the US will not restart for years. The Prime Minister made the admission as she flew to New York to speak at the United Nations General Assembly ahead of a meeting with US President Joe Biden. Mr Biden has stalled on trade negotiations and expressed concerns that the Northern Ireland Protocol could damage the peace process. The Prime Minister has also pledged to give at least £2.3 billion in military aid to Ukraine next year. Liz Truss says the UK will match or exceed the record support given to President Zelensky's troops in their fight against Russian aggression. The royal household is now observing a week of mourning following the state funeral of Queen Elizabeth II. Flags across the UK are now flying at full mast, but they'll remain at half-mast on royal estates, and family members aren't expected to carry out any official duties during this period. The Culture Secretary says the latest figures suggest around 250,000 people filed past the Queen's coffin whilst it was lying in state. Around 6 million people with disabilities will receive a one-off payment of £150 today. The money is part of a package of support to help those struggling with the cost of living crisis. The majority of eligible people can expect the financial boost by the start of October. Sade Financial Secretary James Murray told us more help is needed.
We need to have an intervention which helps people across the board. I think we need something which is quick and effective, which is why we've been calling for a freeze on the energy price cap since the summer. And I think it's the right thing to do. As I say, the question now is who pays? And we've said a windfall tax on oil and gas giants' excess profits is the right thing to do.
The new Justice Secretary is set to meet with striking barristers for the first time since they walked out over pay. Brandon Lewis will sit down with the Criminal Bar Association, something his predecessor, Dominic Raab, had refused to do during the strike. Criminal barristers are due to receive a 15% pay rise from the end of this month, but they argue it'll only apply to new cases and not those sitting in the backlog. Madeleine McCann's parents have lost a case against a former Portuguese policeman who alleged they were involved in their daughter's disappearance. The European Court of Human Rights ruled they were given a fair hearing in Portugal in a libel case against the detective. The court says any reputational damage was the result of local police making the couple official suspects rather than the detective's claims. This is GB News. I'll have more for you in half an hour. Now it's back to the point.
Good morning. You're watching To The Point with myself, Mercy Moriki, and Inaya Falarin Iman. We're on your TV, online and on radio.
Yes, well, Queen Elizabeth II has been laid to rest next to her husband, the Duke of Edinburgh, at St George's Chapel in Windsor. This followed a grand funeral ceremony in Westminster Abbey and a military parade through London commemorating the Queen's life and service.
And Liz Truss makes her first foreign trip as Prime Minister. She's in New York, meeting world leaders for the United Nations General Assembly. What will world leaders be discussing and what should be on their agenda? Well, we'll be looking at that later on.
And clashes have taken place between Hindus and Muslims in Leicester as police call for calm. Why are we seeing these clashes? We'll be talking to an expert later.
Yeah, really interesting discussion. And remember, you can always get in touch on our programme. And if you want to do so, you can get in touch at GBViews at gbnews.uk. That's where you can send in all your thoughts and opinions on everything we're discussing today. Well, as we all saw yesterday, the Queen was finally laid to rest in St George's Chapel in Windsor.
An event planned for decades, but military precision all came down to this moment. A final farewell to a Queen who reigned over us for more than 70 years. Her Majesty's coffin was taken in procession from Westminster Hall, where thousands had filed past to pay their respects, in the state gun carriage of the Royal Navy, pulled by 142 Royal Naval ratings. A tradition dating back to the time of Queen Victoria. At the King's request, the wreath on top of the coffin contained flowers from the gardens of Buckingham Palace, Clarence House and Highgrove, rosemary for remembrance, and myrtle, the ancient symbol of a happy marriage, used in the Queen's own wedding bouquet in 1947. A handwritten note from the King read, "In loving and devoted memory," signed Charles R. A life of service was accompanied by a life in the public eye. Members of the royal family, their dignity and stoicism shone through in the face of unimaginable grief. Princess Charlotte's choice of brooch in the shape of a horseshoe was gifted by her great-grandmother, the Queen. She, alongside her future king brother George, processed behind the coffin with their parents, the Prince and Princess of Wales.
Her late Majesty famously declared on a 21st birthday broadcast that her whole life would be dedicated to serving the nation and Commonwealth. Rarely has such a promise been so well kept.
The Queen was consulted on all of the funeral plans. The hymn you're hearing was played at the Queen's wedding to Prince Philip in 1947. Mounties of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police led the procession from Westminster Abbey to Wellington Arch. Crowds shared in the King's grief, witnessing him and members of his family march behind his mother's coffin. A state hearse brought the Queen's coffin for the committal service at Windsor Castle. More than 800 people, including the Queen's personal staff, filled St George's Chapel. In stark contrast to Prince Philip's funeral, where just 30 people could attend because of COVID restrictions. The imperial state crown, the orb and the sceptre were removed from the coffin and placed on the high altar. The King then placed the Queen's camp colour of the Grenadier Guards on the coffin. The wand broken, creating the symmetry with the 3 instruments of state being removed, ready to be passed on to their successor.
But the merciful goodness of the Lord endureth for ever and ever upon them that fear him.
The Queen was buried with her late husband, Prince Philip, in a private service. Royal mourning continues, grieving together as a family. Cameron Walker, GB News.
Well, Cameron joins us now in the studio. Thank you for that powerful and compelling report. So just tell us, so that the national official mourning ceremony is now come to an end, but for the royals it's continuing for another week, is that right?
Yes, exactly. So we've got another 7 days of royal mourning following the funeral, and then it's 8 o'clock the morning after those 7 days. The flags above royal residences will raise from their current position at half-mast to full mast. I understand that we're not expecting any engagements from members of the royal family. I think it would be very unlikely within this mourning period. We saw over the last 10 days this family have had to very much grieve in public. So I think this week is very much their private time to grieve as a family.
And rightly so. I think they deserve a period to themselves without being in the public eye. We were just obviously watching there in your video the funeral yesterday at Windsor Castle at St George's Chapel, and I kept seeing so many people on Twitter saying, you know, there's so many personal touches that really got them teary in this, not least those corgis and that lone piper. And I have to say, for me, that was what got me as well.
Yeah, Mick and Sandy, the two corgis who came out to see Her Majesty the Queen's coffin process into Windsor Castle, really special. They were gifted to the Queen by the Duke of York in 2021 following the death of her husband, and they're going to go back to the Duke of York now, actually. Also, her horse, Emma, her pony, was also bowed his head on the long walk to Windsor as Her Majesty's coffin passed, and there was that really famous image of Her Majesty only a couple of years ago still riding a horse. I don't know many people in their 90s who can still ride a horse. It was really special. And also the wreath on top of Her Majesty's coffin. At the King's request, it had flowers from the Buckingham Palace garden, Clarence House and Highgrove, and it had myrtle in it, which was used in the Queen's wedding bouquet in 1947. So a lot of personal touches, as you say.
And on that point about personal touch, I mean, the Culture Secretary said 250,000 people turned up for the Queen's lying of state, and obviously millions of people around the world watched it live, and we had several heads of state. I mean, has this been a really powerful moment of national unity, perhaps in ways that we've not seen in a generation? National
unity and also international unity. I think one of the Queen's great strengths was her power of soft diplomacy. And I think with that reception on the eve of the funeral with several world leaders hosted by His Majesty the King and the Queen Consort, is that continuity, that kind of legacy, that structure of having that ability to kind of have many world leaders together in one building, and that power of soft diplomacy, I think, really shone through.
Yeah, but when I was coming on the train this morning, I heard somebody saying they'd learnt more over the last weekend, over the last few days, about the royal family than they have in their entire life. And I overheard them saying, I'm actually embarrassed at how little I knew. Do you think what we've seen over the last few days has actually served as a massive sort of education about the royal family, about how much they mean, and about how much they're loved, and all the things that they do for us, especially for those younger generations?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to remember that this is the first time we have seen something like this in 70 years. It truly is something quite special, and the fact that Will and Kate are now not known as the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, they're known as the Prince and Princess of Wales. All the old archive footage that has been played on news channels over the last 10 days will educate, as you say, Mercy, the children, the generation who perhaps will grow up not knowing the Queen, because all of us, a majority of us in the country, have never known another monarch up until this point. So I think it's important perhaps for children to see these images and understand what a remarkable woman she was.
And just looking ahead now, I mean, the Queen, she, for many people, will be remembered for upholding that position in one of the most elegantly and beautiful ways, you know, duty, continuity, tradition that you mentioned. Is there any sense that, you know, Charles would be continuing that, or perhaps doing something different?
Well, in his speech on the day after Her Majesty the Queen's death, he devoted his life to duty, just as his mother did 70 years ago, I think he's very much aware of the pressure and the responsibility that has been put on him as head of state. And perhaps it's, some people are saying it's the world's longest apprenticeship he had as the Prince of Wales. So I think he knows very much what's coming. His charities, etc., I think are going to be put to one side, and he's very much going to be focusing on duty and bringing the country together. I think one of his biggest challenges is going to be upholding the union of the United Kingdom in a non-political way.
Well, Cameron, thank you so much for filling us in on all of that. End of an era, I would say, but the start of another era. Thank you there, Cameron. Walker, our royal correspondent, I loved those images of Princess Charlotte. At one point, she had to tell her brother Prince George, you know, when the horses go past, you have to nod. She just strikes me as a really mature little girl, and you know, they're just delightful. The kids, aren't they? The Prince and Princess of Wales as kids, they're just, you can just tell they're going to be fantastic royals when they grow up and start taking on their own duties.
Yeah, no, I've read some speculation that King Charles may well turn one of the Balmoral estates into a museum. For the Queen. So I think, you know, there's many fascinating things that will unfold in the coming weeks and months.
It's hard to know how to, you know, what tribute is fitting for the Queen in terms of memorials and things like that, because she was an extraordinary woman, and nothing would seem enough, really, in terms of putting up a memorial or a museum for the Queen.
Yeah, what's your thoughts as well, interestingly, about Meghan Markle and Prince Harry in relation to the last few weeks? Because I'm of the view that actually, hopefully, this can be a big moment for the family to come together and perhaps move on from a lot of the drama that has gone on over the last few years as something just to look forward to the future.
I think what Prince Harry should be doing right now is saying, you know, that memoir I was going to publish and whenever it was meant to be this autumn, I'm scrapping that. I'm not doing it anymore because it's absolutely not the time to be doing that. So I think that's a gesture. If I was Prince Harry, and thank God I'm not, but, you know, that's something I'd be looking to do. I'd say it's absolutely not the right time to be publishing a tell-all book on my family who've just experienced the most unimaginable grief, who've experienced an unimaginable 2 years. So that's what I would do. But let us know
your
what you think. Yes, indeed. But after the break, Prime Minister Liz Truss will meet world leaders in New York later at the UN General Assembly. We're going to be looking at what's on the Prime Minister's agenda. Now we're out of the period of mourning. We'll be finding out after the break.
Looking ahead to today's weather, and the UK is looking dry for many this afternoon, but breezy with some drizzly rain in the northwest. Let's take a look at the details. Well, starting off in the southwest, and here any mist and fog patches will clear by lunchtime to leave a dry but often cloudy afternoon, feeling warm in any sunny breaks. It's a similar picture across the southeast, where it will be dry and fine this lunchtime with some bright or sunny breaks developing. In South Wales, once any mist and fog clears this morning, it will be dry through the rest of the day, with temperatures getting into the high teens Celsius. And whilst it will be mostly dry across the Midlands, as we head into the afternoon, there is a chance of some isolated showers. These will be mostly light, and many will stay dry. There's also the chance of 1 or 2 showers in the northeast. Here it may perhaps be a little brighter than elsewhere, but there will still be quite a bit of cloud. In the north and west of Scotland, it will be a damp afternoon with some drizzly rain. Elsewhere, it's looking mostly dry but quite cloudy with the odd shower. Meanwhile, in Northern Ireland, the best of any brightness this afternoon will be towards the southeast with thicker cloud and perhaps a little rain at times in the northwest. So little change through the afternoon with drizzly rain in the northwest, mostly dry but rather cloudy elsewhere. And that is how the weather is shaping up for you this Tuesday.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England,
Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Stein Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Stein Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Good morning, it's 10:20 and this is To The Point with Inaya Falarin Iman and myself, Mercy Moroki on GB News. We're live on your TV, online and radio.
Well, the Prime Minister Liz Truss is set to meet with US President Joe Biden, French President Emmanuel Macron and other world leaders at the United Nations General Assembly in New York, where the war in Ukraine and global food security will likely feature heavily.
Yes, while the new Prime Minister's in-tray is rapidly filling up and a so-called mini budget is scheduled for this Friday, which is set to introduce measures to tackle the cost of living crisis.
Our political correspondent Tom Harwood joins us right now in the studio to update us on what's on the political agenda. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Tom. Just give us the latest.
Yes, it's so very busy. There was originally a plan from the team around Liz Truss to start her premiership with a positive policy blitz going really hell for leather on all areas. But of course, that was halted really rather quickly. Just hours after this energy price freeze was announced on that first Thursday in office, we got this terrible news about the death of our longest serving monarch. And that has obviously held things up for the best part of 2 weeks. But the period of national mourning ended at 8 a.m. this morning, and that means that steadily but surely things are really getting back to business. Liz Truss last night flew to New York. The UN General Assembly is the middle of this week. She'll be having bilateral meetings with President Biden, with President Macron, with Ursula von der Leyen, and also giving a speech to all 193 members of the United Nations at that General Assembly meeting. But back here at home, we're also seeing a policy blitz as well. We're expecting Jacob Rees-Mogg to get up on his feet in the House of Commons on Wednesday for the first time as Business Secretary, announcing details of the business energy plan, because of course business energy prices haven't been capped in the same way that they have been for individuals, but they will be starting from November. We're expecting potentially October, but there is a difficulty in how quickly legislation can be passed. We'll hear more about that on Wednesday. On Thursday, we'll hear an NHS announcement from the new Secretary of State for Health, Therese Coffey. So we'll hear about how they'll deal with the winter crisis. And then, as you mentioned, on Friday, it's that mini-budget, that fiscal statement, where we'll likely hear about those tax cuts being delivered.
And do we have any indication as to what those tax cuts might entail? Because Liz Truss has already said she intends to not increase corporation tax, for instance, to 25% from 19%. What about personal income tax?
Yes, so there's a rumour around income tax that the scheduled 1% income tax cut that Rishi Sunak announced several months ago now, back when he was Chancellor and not just a humble backbencher as he is now, that could be brought forward to come in this fiscal statement. Now, that's just a rumour at this stage. Of course, one of the things we do know that will be in this statement is the reversal of the national insurance tax rise that came in last year. That's something that Liz Truss spoke a lot about during the leadership campaign and something that she'll want to deliver. And another thing as well, those green levies on energy bills, a smaller proportion of energy bills now because of the global energy situation, but we're going to hear details about them being taken off as well. It's interesting listening back to Liz Truss's energy announcement. She kept referring to a statement that the Chancellor would make in terms of more detail. Of course, that statement couldn't come when it was planned because of the events and national mourning of the last 2 weeks, but to some extent, this is really the part 2 to the energy announcement and the cost of living help that was announced by Liz Truss in the first place. We might hear some more about growth-boosting measures, so-called enterprise zones, areas of low tax, low regulation in the United Kingdom, encouraging growth in what Liz Truss called, during the election campaign, levelling up in a conservative way. Now, that means instead of big fiscal transfers from areas to other areas. It means delivering specific tax cuts or low regulation areas to try and boost growth rather than just try and move money around.
And just finally, I mean, do you think Liz Truss will be able to kind of claw back that momentum that some have argued may have been a challenge for her over the last couple of weeks? Because for many members of the public, they are not really familiar with Liz Truss. Some people argued, and when she became Prime Minister, she may well have been the less known incoming Prime Minister in a generation. So do you think she can kind of regain that momentum?
Yes, it will be tricky. It was interesting, actually, yesterday to see some of the foreign coverage of Her Majesty's funeral. I think it was an Australian news channel that when the cameras focused on Liz Truss, they were saying, oh, no, I think that's a minor royal we have there. Oh, no, wait, I've just been informed that's the new Prime Minister. So, yes, clearly some challenges for the Truss administration, perhaps meeting all of these international leaders over the last couple of days and in New York now for the next couple of days. Maybe that will help. But clearly Number 10 see this now as their opportunity to get on the front foot, a little bit held back, but we're going to see policy, and that's their plan to try and regain the momentum, the news agenda. But of course, that's just Westminster. For the next 2 weeks, it's the party conferences.
Indeed.
This weekend, all political journalists will be descending upon Liverpool for the Labour Party conference. That stretches from Sunday through to Wednesday. And then mirroring that the following week, the next Sunday through to the next Wednesday, Conservative Party conference. That might also be a big opportunity for Liz Truss. First time as Prime Minister, first time as party leader, to set out her stall about what she's all about and try and promote her new growth-focused administration.
Well, Tom, I know you'll be keeping us up to date with everything that is happening, both with that domestic policy and also everything else going on with politics in the world. Well, how about we talk about that UN General Assembly meeting we keep telling you about? Let's speak to Scott Lucas, who's International Politics Professor at the University of Birmingham. Thank you for joining us this morning. Since the last General Assembly, there's been a war broken out in Europe, of course, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Is that going to dominate this meeting of these world leaders?
Oh, it'll certainly be a major topic. Because, of course, Vladimir Putin's aggression, his attempt to conquer Ukraine, his failing attempt to do so, has really taken over the international stage since February. And I think in the context of what you've just been discussing, that you'll see Liz Truss highlighting that the UK is part of an international coalition to back Kiev against that aggression, to provide the necessary economic and military assistance as well as moral support that takes place. And I think you're going to see many high-profile leaders that will be emphasizing that as well, including Joe Biden, as he meets various people from around the world. But the fact of the matter is that one of the people you will not see at the UN General Assembly is Vladimir Putin, because he has isolated himself. Even China is backing away from really getting too close to Russia because of the Russian difficulties and, in fact, the Ukraine advances that we're seeing in recent weeks inside that country.
Just broadening in relation to US and UK relations, I mean, Prime Minister Liz Truss has said that a free trade deal would is unlikely to happen for a number of years. But many people, particularly those who voted Brexit, were told by the then US President, President Trump, that that would be one of the priorities of the US and the UK going forward. So do you think that there may be some challenges in the so-called special relationship?
I think that's an understatement when it comes to the trade deal. Because let me be clear, the idea of a quick US-UK trade deal was always a myth of the Brexiteers, always. Donald Trump was the only one in the US administration that would say that, and Trump would say anything. The fact is that any deal, even a medium-sized deal such as the one between Canada and the EU, took 7 years to complete. A US deal would take even longer, and even if we got the deal, it would be difficult to complete it because of problems with health and safety and because of the effect on UK farmers. And on top of all that, the Johnson government effectively sabotaged any chance of a deal by threatening to suspend the Northern Ireland Protocol, which is a red line for the Americans. So what Liz Truss did yesterday is she admitted, you're not going to get a trade deal. And this whole idea of growth focus that you just heard about from Tom Harwood, that was sort of tied to the idea of a trade deal that was never going to take place. So yeah, challenges is an understatement for Liz Truss in terms of what you do economically when you have effectively isolated yourself, not only from the Americans, but from other markets in the post-Brexit environment.
So what do you think of the future of US-UK relations? I mean, do you think that there are opportunities for it to be stronger, or do you think it's largely in the British imagination?
Well, I think the fact is you've always had a relationship that's been very important since 1945 between US and UK institutions, especially the military, especially the intelligence connections, the diplomatic connections. And you've had a very powerful cultural connection on top of that. Think about what the Queen has meant for so many Americans and what we've seen in, just this past week in the full, round-the-clock coverage in the States. But the fact is that there have been serious political differences. And that's occurred from time to time in the relationship. And those differences have expanded in recent years because of Brexit. Again, we need to be honest about this. The Americans are saying, fine, you make your own way in the world, we understand that, but we would rather have you as part of a strong international community, and that means with good ties with Europe. And if you're always fighting with Europe, and if you're separated from Europe, that's not good for us, as well as saying quietly to the British, it's really not good for you either.
Well, Scott, thank you so much for joining us to discuss that this morning. We'll be bringing up all the goings-on, of course, here on GB News for that UN General Assembly. Scott Lucas there, international politics professor. Let's go to some of your views. Alex says the Prime Minister should not be going to the United Nations and telling Russia we'll give more military aid to Ukraine next year. That will just prolong the war, will it not? I'm not sure she has much of a choice.
Yeah, but actually, a lot of the recent reports over the last few weeks has showed that Ukraine has been making quite significant headway against Russia. So I think actually some of the evidence coming out of the conflict may actually beg to differ. But still a fascinating point.
Yeah, I mean, there's only two options to continue to support Ukraine or not just continue to support Ukraine. And clearly, the latter of those is absolutely not feasible. So I think Liz Truss is pretty much stuck down the trajectory we've already been going on, which is to continue providing military support.
Yeah, just also a point, my view on some of the things that Scott Lucas, our guest that we just had, said in relation to UK-US relations. I do think some of the Republican views might be quite different to his in relation to quite critical of Brexit and so on. There are differences of opinion amongst the American elite about Brexit. It's not all doom and gloom. So.
No, indeed. Well, keep your views coming in, gbviews@gbnews.uk. After the break, we're going to be talking about a developing story here in the UK. 47 people have been arrested as part of an operation to deter further violence in Leicester. It's sectarian violence. What's behind all these tensions? Well, that's what we'll be speaking to social policy analyst Dr. Rakib Ahsan about just after this break and the morning's headlines.
Good morning, it's 10:33. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. Liz Truss says negotiations for a post-Brexit free trade deal with the US will not restart for years. The Prime Minister made the admission as she flew to New York to speak at the United Nations General Assembly ahead of a meeting with US President Joe Biden. Mr. Biden has stalled on trade negotiations and expressed concerns that the Northern Ireland Protocol could damage the peace process. The Prime Minister has also pledged to give at least £2.3 billion in military aid to Ukraine next year. Liz Truss says the UK will match or exceed the record support given to President Zelensky's troops in their fight against Russian aggression. The royal household is now observing a week of mourning following the state funeral of Queen Elizabeth II. Flags across the UK are now flying at full mast, but they'll remain at half-mast on royal estates, and family members aren't expected to carry out any official duties during this period. The Culture Secretary says the latest figures suggest around 250,000 people filed past the Queen's coffin whilst it was lying in state. Madeleine McCann's parents have lost a case against a former Portuguese policeman who alleged they were involved in their daughter's disappearance. The European Court of Human Rights ruled they were given a fair hearing in Portugal in a libel case against the detective. The court says any reputational damage was the result of local police making the couple official suspects rather than the detective's claims. Around 6 million people with disabilities will receive a one-off payment of £150 today. The money is part of a package of support to help those struggling with the cost of living crisis. The majority of eligible people can expect the financial boost by the start of October. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio, and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
It's 10:37. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Anaya Falarin Iman and Mercy Moroki. We're live on your TV, online and radio this morning.
Yes, now a big story developing here in the UK. 47 people have been arrested as part of an operation to deter further disorder and violence in Leicester.
This comes as tensions involving sections of the Muslim and Hindu communities clashed over the weekend after a Pakistan versus India cricket match escalated into violence.
Yes, well, police faced significant aggression to deal with the crowds, and Temporary Chief Constable for Leicester, Rob Nixon, said officers had been brought in from all sorts of different parts of the country to help with the operation.
Well, joining us now to discuss this is Dr. Rakib Ehsan, social policy analyst. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I mean, could you just explain to others, we said it a bit in the introduction, but many people would just be surprised to find that issues and conflicts that seem not necessarily associated with domestic UK politics actually taking on a potentially violent form on the streets of this country?
Well, I think that some of the scenes, the public disorder that's taking place in Leicester may be very surprising for many people. But for others, they may not be so surprised. I think for some time, we've seen the local politics in Leicester become increasingly communalised. The prioritisation of foreign policy issues, foreign territorial disputes, are being prioritised over bread and butter domestic issues. And I do feel that a lot of the public disruption in Leicester, much of that is as a result of out-of-town troublemakers from other major cities such as London and Birmingham entering Leicester. And I think that there is also that problem of recently arrived subcontinental migrants with radical ideological beliefs entering the fray. So you can see that much of the public disorder which is taking place in Leicester, it's a result of a mixture of both domestic and international factors.
I'm not asking you to look into the brains of the people doing this. Clearly, there's been a lot of arrests, and they're not very rational people. But what are the motivations and the intentions behind all of this? Has this been brewing for a long time? Because I have to admit, this is not something I've heard of really before happening in Leicester.
Well, I think Mercy Leicester traditionally has been viewed as a paragon of social cohesion, the truest interfaith success story in modern day Britain. But there have been recent developments which have contributed towards the social tensions and the escalation of public disorder which has been seen in Leicester. I do feel that the socio-political leadership in Leicester has been somewhat complacent. And we have to be honest that there are, under Britain's model of state-backed multiculturalism, all too often it's a sort of self-appointed community spokesmen who don't really have social cohesion at heart. They've been empowered. And unfortunately, what we're seeing in Leicester, it's almost collapsing into some sort of Hindutva Islamist battleground, and law-abiding, community-spirited Hindus and Muslims living in the city are caught in the crossfire.
On that point about perhaps the lack of kind of socio-political leadership, because I mean, for many people in the UK for the last couple of weeks have been engrossed really in this period of national mourning and have been amazed by the national unity that has been shown. But I guess beyond that, there are real fractures and fragmentation in many parts of British society. And how do we kind of meet those two things, that on the one hand, the desire to have a cohesive civic identity and the reality of these kind of fracturing identity groups across the country?
Well, I think in order to cultivate and maintain a cohesive civic identity, that takes a great deal of work. And I do feel that in cities such as Leicester, there has been a complacency that's creeped in. I think it's worth noting that last month, the University of Leicester announced that it was planning to hold a series of events celebrating multicultural success in Leicester and immigration-induced diversity. And I do think that almost demonstrates that kind of complacency that I'm referring to. In order to maintain and consolidate social cohesion in hyper-diverse urban areas, that takes a great deal of hard work, a great deal of on-the-ground interfaith and inter-ethnic activities. But on top of that, if I'm being if I'm being absolutely honest, we do have to see problematic patterns of immigration, and I do think that we can't ignore the Hindutva threat, especially when we're looking at post-Brexit liberalisation of immigration rules when it comes to countries such as India. So what we really need to do is work towards a more pro-integration immigration system, and we have to confront various forms of foreign-inspired sectarianism and ultra-religious identity politics in our communities.
But how do you do that? Because, you know, we do live in a civil country where we have rights, a variety of rights. And in many ways, that's why lots of people are drawn to this country to come and make Britain their home. How do you force somebody to integrate if they don't really want to? Or how do you sort of chip away at some of these tensions, these sectarian tensions, when we live in a free country and those people can believe what they want and they can hold whichever views that they like?
Well, I think that you make a really good point there, Mercy. I do feel that people have taken advantage of the religious freedoms afforded to them under British democracy, and that there has to be robust social and political action against those who do take advantage of those rights and freedoms. There has to be an understanding that while we do have religious freedoms in the UK, that should not be at the expense of social cohesion. Now, of course, there are already people living in the UK who are reluctant to integrate into mainstream liberal democratic norms, and we have to do work in terms of confronting those attitudes. My concern is if we are adding to those numbers through a fairly laissez-faire immigration system, then that's only going to worsen the situation. One point that I would like to make is that there are a number of mainstream British politicians. They are guilty of fraternising with Islamist and Hindu organisations in the name of personal gain. That really has to end. And law and order enforcement, I think, in Leicester, I think that, to be honest, Leicestershire police force was ill-equipped. And I think I'm glad to hear that there's now interforce cooperation in terms of policing. So we also have to look at law and order and community cohesion plans for various parts of the country.
Thank you so much for joining us and bringing us your fascinating insights on the issues unfolding in Leicester. Thank you, Dr. Ricky Baysan, social policy analyst.
Yes, now, the parents of Madeleine McCann have lost a libel case against former Portuguese policeman Gonçalo Amaral for accusing them of being involved in Madeleine's disappearance in 2007. This is just coming out this morning, and our Home and Security editor, Mark White, can get us up to date with everything that's happened. Mark, so the parents have lost this libel case.
Yeah, it's the culmination, really, of a 14-year legal battle by the parents of Madeleine McCann. They took action initially in 2008 after former Detective Inspector Amaral published a book, also appeared in a documentary and newspaper interview in which he effectively said that the McCanns were covering up the death of their daughter, that somehow they had been involved in that. And now, since then, as I say, the McCanns sued the former Detective Inspector, initially having some success in the Portuguese courts, but then that was overturned. And they fought that legal battle right up through the Portuguese system until there was a Supreme Court decision in 2017 by the Portuguese Supreme Court that ruled in favour of the former Detective Inspector. And the McCanns then took it to the European Court of Human Rights under the European Convention on Human Rights, claiming that their right to a private life and a presumption of innocence had been violated. But now in this statement and ruling this morning from the European Court of Human Rights, they say that no, their rights have not been violated by that decision by the Portuguese Supreme Court, that actually the suspicion had fallen on the McCanns before this book had come out and any comments made publicly by the Detective Inspector in actually the official reports when they were named arguido or suspects in Portugal in 2007. So that damage was already there and in place through the official investigation process, and anything subsequently claimed by this Detective Inspector in the opinion of the European Court on Human Rights did not further damage that.
I mean, what are some of the consequences of this judgment? I mean, that the McCann family must feel that these wounds or suspicion and speculation may well now rise again following this judgment.
I think for many people out there, there's always been suspicion on the McCann family, right or wrong. They will not be swayed by that, their opinion, believing many of the theories, conspiracy theories you can call them, that are out there. People believe that somehow the McCanns had some role in the death of their daughter, or at the very least covered it up. I have to say that any official sources, police in this country investigating it, do not believe that to be the case at all. And of course, that cloud of suspicion has hung over the McCanns as far as some people are concerned, even if the majority of people absolutely believe that there was a stranger involved in the abduction and probably the death of Madeleine McCann. We know, of course, in recent months and years that German authorities have named a suspect, Christian Bucher, as their prime suspect. He is a man who's currently serving a sentence for the rape of a pensioner in Praia-da-Luz, where Madeleine McCann disappeared from 2 years before her disappearance. There's also evidence, cell site evidence from his mobile phone, linking him to a telephone call that he received on his mobile phone shortly before the abduction of Madeleine McCann. We're talking, less than an hour before her abduction, and very, very close to the area in Praia-da-Luz where that happened. There's other evidence, clearly, that the German authorities have. But going back to the McCanns, from their point of view, one of the concerning aspects for them is not just the reputational damage that they say they've suffered and the finger of suspicion that will inevitably be pointed back at them by many people now. It's also the fact that they are facing very significant legal costs in what has been a very lengthy legal process. They have 3 months to appeal to the European Court of Human Rights again on this decision today. Whether they do that or not, I don't know. It seems a fairly emphatic judgment by the European Court in Human Rights, for instance, on the point where the McCanns were claiming that Supreme Court in Portugal had somehow suggested that they were guilty by inference of fact that the decision that they'd made not to find in their favour the original claim that they'd made. The European Court of Human Rights said that actually that claim was manifestly ill-founded. So it seems a fairly emphatic judgment by the ECHR. Let's see what the Madeleine McCann's parents now do in terms of their next move.
Well, thank you so much, Mark White, for bringing us that update on this story in relation to the McCann family who have lost their case with the European Court of Human Rights. Thank you, our Home and Security Editor.
And now protests have erupted in Iran following the death of a 22-year-old woman in police custody on Friday. Mahsa Amini was arrested by the country's morality police after allegedly breaking hijab rules.
Yes, her death sparked protests across the nation where 2 people were reportedly killed in clashes with the riot police on Monday. Thousands of people took part in her funeral in the Kurdish city of Sakaz, which erupted into an anti-regime protest on Sunday.
Yes, well, Tehran's police chief said that the death of Mahsa Amini was, quote, an unfortunate incident in an attempt to quell further protests across the country. Some of these protests have seen women take off and burn their hijabs.
Yes, well, joining us now to discuss this is Kambiz Galfari, a journalist and human rights campaigner. Thank you for joining us on the programme. I mean, do you think that the incident that has happened and the protest that has unfolded will do any damage for the regime? Do you think that they will pay attention to increasing numbers of people in Iran concerned about the morality police and the rules of compulsory hijab against women?
Any permanent change in Iran for the improvement of human rights, especially women's rights, depends on the changes in the law. We have now IPC, Islamic Penal Code in Iran, so it's full of discrimination. For not having hijab, you might face harsh sentences. For adultery, For if you are unmarried, a couple 100 lashes. Married couple can face death sentences. So the regime has two ways. First, to listen to the people and change the law fundamentally. And if the regime does so, then it should change everything. It should change the Islamic nature of the regime and its ideology. So it's a bit far, I think, from thinking at this moment. But people try to force regime to do some changes. This is not only about hijab. 43 years of repression. In all the aspects of human rights, if you see in Iran, political freedoms, social freedoms, economic freedoms, nothing is there. So I think the protest is not only just for having some hijab freedom, it is for having fundamental freedoms. That's why I think the regime has some difficult days, because I should point out that the president of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Ibrahim Raisi, is going to the General Assembly of the United Nations, and he wants to address the world leaders while his people are in the streets of Iran protesting against him and protesting against the Islamic Republic of Iran. That's why I think regime has some difficult days ahead, and people, it seems, they are very much angry, and they are determined to achieve some goals. And as I said, the goals, one of the goals is the permanent changes in the laws.
Well, Kambiz Ghaffari, thank you so much for joining us and updating us on that very tragic situation, the death of that lady. Thank you for being on the programme. Journalist and human rights campaigner. They're really tragic. But as you said, it's not just this policy that needs to change. You'd have to change the sort of whole ideological underpinning, really, of even this morality police. They shouldn't have to exist.
Many basic rights in Iran are not there, and it is ironic that some of their leaders are going to be at this UN General Assembly. But solidarity with the women of Iran. Keep all of your thoughts coming in to us on email, gbviews@gbnews.uk. We'll be getting back to those at the top of the next hour, just after the break.
Hello. Quite a lot of cloud around for many of us over the next couple of days. There will be some breaks in the cloud, allowing a little brightness to come through at times, but for the majority of us, it is a dry looking picture, and that's all thanks to this large area of high pressure dominating the weather across much of the UK, both today and through much of the rest of the week. But there is a change coming. This weather front, which is bringing thicker cloud and outbreaks of rain to the far north and northwest of Scotland, will eventually make progress southeastwards, but not until the latter part of the week. Until then, it's a largely dry picture, quite a lot of cloud around for many of us, and that cloud just about thick enough to produce a few light drizzly showers here and there, but that's the exception rather than the rule. And as I mentioned, there will be some breaks in the cloud at times, so a little bit of brightness here and there. And it's more of the same through this evening and overnight. Still a good deal of cloud around, still a largely dry picture, just some more persistent rain at times for the far northwest of Scotland. And actually that cloud might break up a little bit overnight tonight, but it will be a mild one. Temperatures for most of us remaining in double figures. And we could see a little bit of mist and fog developing, particularly so across parts of East Anglia and the south east of England. And that will be with us first thing tomorrow morning, eventually melting away once the sunshine gets going. But then for most of us, after a fairly bright start for many, will start to cloud over once again as the day progresses. Temperatures generally high teens or just about nudging into the low 20s, so feeling fairly pleasant if you do get a glimpse of that sunshine. And then, as I mentioned, this thicker cloud with outbreaks of rain associated with that weather front does start to make slow progress southeastwards later in the day tomorrow, and more especially on Thursday and Friday, but very slow progress indeed. So for some of us, we'll be underneath that cloud and rain, for others remaining dry. Bye for now.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online. We're proud to be the People's Channel, Britain's
News channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Good morning. This is To The Point on GB News with Inaya Falarin Iman and myself, Mercy Moroki. We're on your TV, radio and online.
Yeah, we are here with you until midday with all of the top news and biggest stories and lots of discussions with expert guests.
Yes, and we'd love to hear your views as well on everything we're discussing today. So get them in at gbviews@gbnews.uk and we'll get to as many as we can before the end of the programme. But first, here's your latest headlines.
Good morning, it's 11 o'clock. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. Liz Truss says negotiations for a post-Brexit free trade deal with the US will not restart for years. The Prime Minister made the admission as she flew to New York to speak at the United Nations General Assembly ahead of a meeting with US President Joe Biden. Mr. Biden has stalled on trade negotiations and expressed concerns that the Northern Ireland Protocol could damage the peace process. The Prime Minister has also pledged to give at least £2.3 billion in military aid to Ukraine next year. Liz Truss says the UK will match or exceed the record support given to President Zelensky's troops in their fight against Russian aggression. The royal household is now observing a week of mourning following the state funeral of Queen Elizabeth II. Flags across the UK are now flying at full mast, but they'll remain at half-mast on royal estates, and family members aren't expected to carry out any official duties during this period. The Culture Secretary says the latest figures suggest around 250,000 people filed past the Queen's coffin whilst it was lying in state. Madeleine McCann's parents have lost a case against a former Portuguese policeman who alleged they were involved in their daughter's disappearance. The European Court of Human Rights ruled they were given a fair hearing in Portugal in a libel case against the detective. The court says any reputational damage was the result of local police making the couple official suspects rather than the detective's claims. Around 6 million people with disabilities will receive a one-off payment of £150 today. The money is part of a package of support to help those struggling with the cost of living crisis. The majority of eligible people can expect the financial boost by the start of October. Shadow Financial Secretary James Murray told us more help is needed.
We need to have an intervention which helps people across the board. I think we need something which is quick and effective, which is why we've been calling for a freeze on the energy price cap since the summer, and I think it's the right thing to do. As I say, the question now is who pays, and we've said a windfall tax on oil and gas giants' excess profits is the right thing to do.
A coroner has offered his deepest sympathies to the family of Molly Russell, who took her own life after watching content on social media which raised concerns. The 14-year-old looked at tens of thousands of online posts before she died in November 2017, including material which was linked to anxiety, depression and self-harm. An inquest, which reopened this morning, will consider whether algorithms contributed to her death. Culture Secretary Michelle Donnellan says legislation is being brought forward to tighten internet safety laws.
We've heard some horrific stories of people accessing suicide forums, of getting content on social media groups that is drastically inappropriate for their age group, and it can have devastating consequences because it can influence young people and children who are not of an age that should be looking at that content. And this government is responsible, decisive, and that's why we're going to bring forward this legislation to protect children and young people under the age of 18.
Police are offering a £20,000 reward for help to find the remains of a missing 70-year-old woman. Norma Girolami from Highgate in North London was last seen last summer. The Met Police says she took a train from Barking to Leigh-on-Sea and back again in August, but wasn't heard from again. A man has been charged with her murder and is currently in custody awaiting trial. The new Justice Secretary is set to meet with striking barristers for the first time since they walked out over pay. Brandon Lewis will sit down with the Criminal Bar Association, something his predecessor Dominic Raab had refused to do during the strike. Criminal barristers are due to receive a 15% pay rise from the end of this month, but they argue it will only apply to new cases and not those sitting in the backlog. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens, of course. Now, though, let's get back to the point.
Good morning. This is To The Point on GB News with myself, Mercy Moroki, and Inaya Falarian Iman. We're on your TV, radio and online.
Yes. Well, the Queen has been laid to rest alongside her husband, Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, in a private service inside St George's Chapel in Windsor. Royals, world leaders and hundreds of members of the public were at Westminster Abbey for the funeral.
And as the public mourns the death of the beloved Queen, the focus has now shifted back to economic priorities, and Prime Minister Liz Truss and Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng are expected to deliver a mini budget on Friday to tackle the cost of living crisis. We'll be looking at that a bit more later on.
Yes, and Liz Truss is set to meet with world leaders at the United Nations General Assembly in New York. In her first foreign trip as Prime Minister, Liz Truss will focus on the war in Ukraine and the global crisis in food security.
Yes, well, that's all coming up on our programme. We're here for another hour, and you can get in touch with your views as usual on gbviews@gbnews.uk. We'll be going to some of your views in just a moment.
Now, the Queen has been laid to rest alongside her husband, Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, in a private service inside St George's Chapel in Windsor. Our royal reporter Cameron Walker looks back at the historic state funeral for the Queen in London.
An event planned for decades, but military precision all came down to this moment. A final farewell to a Queen who reigned over us for more than 70 years. Her Majesty's coffin was taken in procession from Westminster Hall, where thousands had filed past to pay their respects, in the State's gun carriage of the Royal Navy, pulled by 142 Royal Naval ratings, a tradition dating back to the time of Queen Victoria. At the King's request, the wreath on top of the coffin contained flowers from the gardens of Buckingham Palace, Clarence House and Highgrove, rosemary for remembrance, and myrtle, the ancient symbol of a happy marriage, used in the Queen's own wedding bouquet in 1947. A handwritten note from the King read, "In loving and devoted memory," signed Charles R. A life of service was accompanied by a life in the public eye. Members of the royal family, their dignity and stoicism shone through in the face of unimaginable grief. Princess Charlotte's choice of brooch in the shape of a horseshoe was gifted by her great-grandmother, the Queen. She, alongside her future king brother George, processed behind the coffin with their parents, the Prince and Princess of Wales.
Her late Majesty famously declared on a 21st birthday broadcast that her whole life would be dedicated to serving the nation and Commonwealth. Rarely has such a promise been so well kept.
The Queen was consulted on all of the funeral plans. The hymn you're hearing was played at the Queen's wedding to Prince Philip in 1947. Mounties of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police led the procession from Westminster Abbey to Wellington Arch. Crowds shared in the King's grief, witnessing him and members of his family march behind his mother's coffin. A State's hearse brought the Queen's coffin for the committal service at Windsor Castle. More than 800 people, including the Queen's personal staff, filled St George's Chapel. In stark contrast to Prince Philip's funeral, where just 30 people could attend because of COVID restrictions. The imperial state crown, the orb and the sceptre were removed from the coffin and placed on the high altar. The King then placed the Queen's camp colour of the Grenadier Guards on the coffin. The wand broken, creating the symmetry with the three instruments of state being removed, ready to be passed on to their successor.
But the merciful goodness of the Lord endureth for ever and ever upon them that fear him.
The Queen was buried with her late husband, Prince Philip, in a private service. Royal mourning continues, grieving together as a family. Cameron Walker, GB News.
Well, our national reporter Paul Hawkins is in Windsor for us this morning. Good morning, Paul. Obviously a huge day, an emotional day in Windsor yesterday. What sorts of numbers did we see?
So according to Thames Valley Police, Mercy, 100,000 people turned out for the procession in Windsor yesterday. And if you know anything about Windsor, it's basically a very small town with an enormous castle in the middle of it. So 100,000 people literally packed the streets yesterday to see the procession. And we know the very deep relationship that Windsor has with Her Majesty the Queen, so perhaps not a surprise. As that very private burial service with the family, no media invited, took place last night, the royal family tweeted a couple of pictures, unseen pictures of the Queen from her past. The first from 1971, a colour picture of her at Balmoral walking uphill with a staff in her hands. One of the other royal residences that she loved to spend a lot of private time at, and then also a picture, and this is very relevant to the ceremony that took place last night, a black and white picture of her with her family, with her mother and father, Prince Philip, and also her sister, and of course she's now been laid to rest with them in the King George Memorial burial place inside the chapel, just inside Windsor Castle behind me. In terms of how Windsor's feeling today, it is still quite busy, although nowhere near as busy as yesterday and nowhere near as busy as it has been in the past week. In the last few minutes, the barriers on this side of the road have been taken away by contractors. They're still in place on the other side of the road. There is still some media around reporting on what's going on. Of course, the state mourning period's now over, but as we know, or as anyone who's ever dealt with grief before knows, that some grief is sometimes it's something that never ends, and it's something that you just manage along the way. So the family's official grieving period continues for the next 7 days, but that's only an official grieving period for the family, and who knows how much longer it will last beyond that.
Just on that point about the fact that the official mourning period is over, I mean, have you seen a change in the mood and the atmosphere now that it is the official mourning period is now come to an end?
Yeah, it definitely feels like it. Just very slowly, life in Windsor and indeed around the country, as I was travelling into Windsor, is just starting to crank back into life. You can see on the advertising billboards by motorways, railway stations, they've gone back to bombarding us with messages to buy stuff instead of kind of very dignified pictures of the Queen, in honour of Her Majesty, etc. In fact, if I just look behind me, this shop, this barber shop that faces the castle, this morning when we got here at about 7 a.m, it was covered in, the windows were covered up with pictures of Her Majesty, all in black. They were here very early this morning, pulling them down. So there are signs here that Windsor is starting to crank back to life and people are starting to get on with their life. But as I say, for the royal family themselves, for them, it's about their great-grandmother, their grandmother, their mother. And the grieving process for them may never end, and it's just a case of managing it.
Paul, thank you for bringing us that update from Windsor. There it was 100,000, so 100,000 in Windsor, Paul said there, and then about 250,000, I think, is what the government have said, who joined that queue to see Her Majesty's coffin lying.
And of course, millions, if not tens of millions, of people watching it.
Yeah.
Some people have speculated that it may well be the most watched thing in history.
I'm sure it would have been. It'd be interesting to, as time goes on, see the kinds of figures that there were for the TV coverage of it, because it would have been streamed absolutely everywhere across the world.
Yeah, and it's also, remarkable as this is obviously in the United Kingdom, but on top of that, other countries such as America, New Zealand and many other parts of the world streamed it live, and many of the news reports were live reporting it, and it just shows just the momentous nature of the occasion, not just for the UK but internationally.
Well, let's go to some of your views as promised. We have a view here from somebody who doesn't seem to have left their name, but they've said, if you look just below the surface, you may yet see the strong foundations of a united kingdom. This is the greatest gift Her Majesty has ever given to her people. God save the King. And I think that's so true, because this, her funeral, or all the processions, all the activities and events have really brought together the country in a way that I don't think most of us have seen in our lifetime, in a way we'll probably never see in our lifetimes. And people who thought we were a crumbling nation and there wasn't enough social cohesion, I think they have very much been proven wrong in so many respects, as the country has very much come together.
Yeah, no, I agree with that to an extent. I think, what Dr. Rakib was saying about the fact that it does take a lot of hard work to kind of build that sense of civic unity and foundation, and I think these events become a focal point, and that is really important, but we should not be complacent insofar as we still have to do that long and arduous work of dealing with the root causes of people's challenges and alienation. And I do think I agree with you, it was powerful to see thousands, tens of thousands of Scottish people coming out and showing their condolences and support for the nation. And I hope that the politicians and all of us can continue that spirit of national unity. So I think that is a very strong point. On the point that we were talking about in the previous hour in relation to US and UK relations, Steve says America looks after America, nothing has changed there, let's get on with sorting out our own country. Well, if only that was the case, as the phrase goes, if America sneezes, Britain does catch a cold, and we are very dependent on them in terms of projecting our power globally, economically, and so I don't think we could depart from America even if we tried. But
many of us will probably be catching a cold this winter because we can't heat our homes. But David has wrote in to say, there is a hypocrisy on trade deal. When a trade deal looked likely under Trump, Remainers used to complain about bleached chicken and GM food. Interesting this, because of course that was the big debate that went on last time we were talking about a trade deal with America and US. You just kept hearing, does this mean we have to lower our food standards? Does this mean, we have to accept bleached chicken? Because we do have very high food standards comparatively when you look across the world. And inevitably, if we do end up doing a special deal with America, those things will have to go back on the table. We will have to accept some things we probably don't really like.
Yeah, and I think, people people saying, criticising the Brexiteers for arguing for a free trade deal, we have to also remember that we had, I think, 4 years of trying to thwart the referendum result. Many of those years could have actually have been spent organising a trade deal under the President Trump, which he was very supportive of. Now, I've got many criticisms of Trump, to say the least, but that was one thing he was very supportive of, and that was a trade deal. So we cannot just say, oh, this is just another example of Brexit failing, when actually many people in the political class tried to prevent it from happening, stalling progress on these issues.
Yeah, well, of course, the woman who was striking all those trade deals after Brexit, Liz Truss, who was the Trade Secretary at the time and is now our Prime Minister, isn't she? Well, her and her new Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, Kwasi Kwarteng, they're going to deliver a mini budget this Friday. They're going to set out the government's economic priority as the cost of living crisis deepens. We're going to be talking about this a bit later on, after the weather.
Hello. Quite a lot of cloud around for many of us over the next couple of days. There will be some breaks in the cloud, allowing a little brightness to come through at times, but for the majority of us, it is a dry looking picture, and that's all thanks to this large area of high pressure dominating the weather across much of the UK, both today and through much of the rest of the week. But there is a change coming. This weather front, which is bringing thicker cloud and outbreaks of rain to the far north and northwest of Scotland, will eventually make progress southeastwards, but not until the latter part of the week. Until then, it's a largely dry picture, quite a lot of cloud around for many of us, and that cloud just about thick enough to produce a few light drizzly showers here and there, but that's the exception rather than the rule. And as I mentioned, there will be some breaks in the cloud at times, so a little bit of brightness here and there. And it's more of the same through this evening and overnight. Still a good deal of cloud around, still a largely dry picture, just some more persistent rain at times for the far northwest of Scotland. And actually that cloud might break up a little bit overnight tonight, but it will be a mild one. Temperatures for most of us remaining in double figures. And we could see a little bit of mist and fog developing, particularly so across parts of East Anglia and the south east of England. And that will be with us first thing tomorrow morning, eventually melting away once the sunshine gets going. But then for most of us, after a fairly bright start for many, will start to cloud over once again as the day progresses. Temperatures generally high teens or just about nudging into the low 20s, so feeling fairly pleasant if you do get a glimpse of that sunshine. And then, as I mentioned, this thicker cloud with outbreaks of rain associated with that weather front does start to make slow progress southeastwards later in the day tomorrow, and more especially on Thursday and Friday, but very slow progress indeed. So for some of us, we'll be underneath that cloud and rain, for others remaining dry. Bye for now.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online. We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's
News channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel, And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
It's 11:23. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Anaya Falarin Eman and Mercy Muroki. We're live on your TV, online and radio this morning.
Yes, now Prime Minister Liz Truss and her new Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, will deliver a mini-budget on Friday, setting out the government's economic policies as the cost of living crisis deepens.
Yes, the budget is expected to confirm tax cuts that were promised in the leadership contest and to clarify how the energy bills freeze will be funded.
Yes, well, an opinion piece in The Times from the Director General of the Institute of Economic Affairs, Mark Littlewoods, looks at how the new Chancellor needs to be more radical with his economic plans, including removing the cap of on bankers' bonuses. Well, let's speak to him now. Mark joins us. Good morning, always great to see you. So we've got a new Chancellor. We obviously haven't had, or the government hasn't had much time really just to speak about their plans because we've had this period of mourning and reflection. What does Kwasi Kwarteng need to say, and more importantly, what does he need to do when he stands up and speaks to the public?
Well, it's really interesting. You've introduced the topic perfectly by the government, and indeed everybody's describing this as a mini budget. I think this needs to be a maxi budget. It needs to be hugely radical and decisive. You've rightly said that Liz Truss, during the Conservative leadership campaign, confirmed that she would abolish the rise in national insurance contributions and would also abolish the rise in corporation tax. I'm expecting the Chancellor of the Exchequer to almost do those in the first sentence or two of his speech on Friday when he stands up at the dispatch box. But I think we're going to need to see a lot more of that. The cost of living crisis is acute, really serious. It's not just afflicting people at the bottom end of the income spectrum. People on average to middling salaries are struggling to get by. So I'm expecting and hoping that we'll see a large number of tax cuts. But I think he needs to go even further than that. It won't just be about tax and spend. I'm really hoping there'll be a lot about regulation and red tape, which I suspect and hope that Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss will be wanting to remove in order to really boost enterprise. So for all it's a mini budget, it's an emergency fiscal event. I think we might see the most radical changes in tax and regulatory policy since the 1980s on Friday afternoon.
And that would really set this government apart from the previous one. I think after every budget, there was often a sense of disappointment for years. You know, we had the focus solely on COVID. So if we do see some radical measures to the extent that you're describing and hoping for, then this would really be a positive stamp for Liz Truss administration.
Yeah, I'm taking the Prime Minister at her word. She has said she wants to rip up the orthodoxy. There's no more steady as she goes managerialism. I think actually we have a very radical Prime Minister and a very radical administration. But she has basically talked the talk. The test on Friday is her government going to walk the walk? If it is just a few fiddles here and there and steady as she goes, then I will be hugely disappointed. But I suspect that there's no time to lose. You've rightly pointed out, of course, the government's lost an awful lot of impetus in its early days because of the tragic death of Her Majesty the Queen. But that's actually given them time behind the scenes to plan for this. This is almost the launch of the new government on Friday. And I think we should look into the whites of their eyes and to see whether they're really going to deliver. I'm anticipating it is going to be very, very surprising and very radical, not a mini budget at all, not a fiscal event, a very, very clear and decisive direction of a change in economic policy. taxes down, regulation down, more power to individual men and women, and a bit less power to centralised government.
Yeah, and the balance each Prime Minister and each Chancellor has to strike when just helping the public in a cost of living crisis is trying to figure out who gets the most help and who benefits most. And in theory, that should always be the poorest people in society. But the Institute for Fiscal Study has basically said people earning more than £100,000 will benefit most. They're saying that poorest 3 million households will be as little as 63p a month better off under the national insurance cuts. In particular, do you think when all is said and done, what we're going to see is actually the rich have benefited the most?
Look, it's possible. I think on the IFS's numbers, not that I speak for them, that's only measuring the national insurance contribution reduction. But I'm expecting a change of this government not to not care about the poor. The people at the bottom end of the income spectrum are the most important, but not to design every policy such that that's the only cohort that matters. I think there are people in the middle who are really struggling to get by as well. So I hope it isn't designed on some Institute for Fiscal Studies Excel spreadsheet about who gets what. The biggest cost of living crisis in this country is not, oddly enough, energy bills, even though they're going through the roof and people are struggling with them. The biggest cost of living for most households is their tax bill, not just income tax, VAT, all sorts of hidden taxes that people don't even realise they pay. That is easily the biggest cost of living for virtually every household in the United Kingdom. Not all, but a good 90% of us. That's our biggest cost of living. I'd like to see the government relieve that cost of living by lowering taxes, rather than to try and fix it by giving more welfare handouts to offset the cost of energy. How we do that, I think, is an interesting conundrum. I don't think all of it should be focused at the bottom end of the income spectrum, although those are the most important and needy people. I think it needs to be across the board. And if we're to take the Prime Minister at her word, she isn't going to work out how to divide the pie. This is what she said in one of her key interviews just before becoming Prime Minister. She's going to work out how to grow the pie. And that means, for example, you might see an increase in the threshold at which point people pay the 40p rate of tax. I think that would be an interesting move. Doesn't benefit the poor, does benefit enterprise. If we want to grow the economy again, we're going to have to think radically rather than just who gets what slice of what in a budget.
And just finally, I mean, do you think that Liz Truss has enough time? Because there's pretty much a year and a half before, the minds start to focus very intensely on the election. Quite a few years has been lost of this new administration. Do you think that she has the focus, the political will and the determination to really get this up to speed very quickly?
I think she's got the focus, the determination and the political will. I fear she hasn't got enough time. She's got 700 days there or thereabouts until the next general election. I don't think any Prime Minister would have wanted to walk into this sort of in-tray, and that was even before Her Majesty the Queen passed away. It is a nightmare hand that she has been dealt. But she's got the days in office that she's got, and because time is so short, I don't think she can lose any further days. So I don't think she can kick things down the road, kick them into the long grass. She's got 700 days, use every single one of them to maximum effect.
Yes, gosh, when you put it like that, 700 days, it does not seem a lot. But some would say, well, she has been dealt a bad hand, but you probably can't get too much worse than we are at the moment. Well, hopefully you can't. So maybe that plays in her favour. But for now, Mark Littlewood, thank you for joining us, Institute of Economic Affairs Director General there.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it is. It's not a lot of time, but actually, she is clearly a very ambitious and a woman that knows what she wants and wants to go for it. So I have at least some faith that she's going to give a fair crack at the whip of this.
Yeah, and she's Liz Truss, and many people don't know too much about her, but she comes from a maths background. I think her dad's like a maths professor or something, and she's she's always been a big advocate for maths. So in a way, I feel like she's going to be thinking about problems in a very logical way and not romanticising things in a way that perhaps Boris Johnson did, and just sort of cracking on with the job in a very logical way that makes sense, and hopefully trying to balance the books when whenever we're able to do that. So, I think we're definitely going to see a different kind of leadership from her and a different kind of thinking at the heart of government.
Yeah, undoubtedly. And as I, mentioned just a moment ago, even just this idea of a budget, oftentimes after the budget, there was a profound sense of disappointment because very few things actually benefited many people in any significant way. So let's hope that with this new Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, we'll see a change.
Yes, we'll be bringing you all of that, of course, on GB News, and we'll be analysing everything he says on Friday. But now, after the break, around 6 million disabled people in the UK will receive their one-off £150 disability cost of living payment. That starts from today. Well, this payment was announced back in May as part of the package of support by former Chancellor Rishi Sunak. We're going to be looking at all of that after this short break. But first, here's your morning headlines.
Good morning, it's 11:33. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. Liz Truss says negotiations for a post-Brexit free trade deal with the US will not restart for years. The Prime Minister made the admission as she flew to New York to speak at the United Nations General Assembly ahead of a meeting with US President Joe Biden. Mr. Biden has stalled on trade negotiations and expressed concerns that the Northern Ireland Protocol could damage the peace process. The Prime Minister has also pledged to give at least £2.3 billion in military aid to Ukraine next year. Liz Truss says the UK will match or exceed the record support given to President Zelensky's troops in their fight against Russian aggression. The royal household is now observing a week of mourning following the state funeral of Queen Elizabeth II. Flags across the UK are now flying at full mast, but they'll remain at half-mast on royal estates. And family members aren't expected to carry out any official duties during this period. The Culture Secretary says the latest figures suggest around 250,000 people filed past the Queen's coffin whilst it was lying in state. Madeleine McCann's parents have lost a case against a former Portuguese policeman who alleged they were involved in their daughter's disappearance. The European Court of Human Rights ruled they were given a fair hearing in Portugal in a libel case against the detective. The court says any reputational damage was a result of local police making the couple official suspects rather than the detective's claims. Around 6 million people with disabilities will receive a one-off payment of £150 today. The money is part of a package of support to help those struggling with the cost of living crisis. The majority of eligible people can expect the financial boost by the start of October. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England,
Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio, and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's
News channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Good morning, it's 11:37 and this is To The Point on GB News with myself, Mercy Moroki, and Inaya Falarin Iman. We're live on your TV, online and radio.
Yes, indeed. Well, today we'll see some 6 million people receive a one-off disability payment of £150. This comes ahead of the so-called mini-budget this Friday, where Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng will lay out his plans to tackle the cost of living crisis.
Yes, well, Anna Riley, our Yorkshire and Humber reporter, is in Leeds this morning, and she's with Anastasia Tempest, who's a journalist and writer whose cerebral palsy means she relies on an electronic wheelchair to get around. Good morning, Anna. So there's obviously this £150 payment. Oh, I think we're just working on getting Anna. £150 payment. Lots of what I was going to say to Anna is it's welcome. Any money, I suppose, is welcome when we are in a cost of living crisis. But still, you know, £150 does seem like a drop in the ocean when people face costs which have risen by thousands of pounds.
Exactly. You know, I couldn't have put it better. I think that for a lot of people, £150 just simply it is not enough, and undoubtedly it's going to help. But for many people, that barely covers, you know, some food sometimes, and it depends, especially, you know, depending on where you live. And so for many people, this does not go far enough.
Yes, people who have disabilities, of course, you know, disabilities come in all sorts of variations, so we shouldn't generalise. But if you have a disability, for example, that means you rely on extra transport getting you around everywhere, cost of fuel, you know, you're facing higher electricity bills if you require machinery and things like that. So already people with lots of disabilities face higher costs and higher bills as it is, much higher than sort of your average household. But we can go to Anna at the moment, who, as we say, is with Anastasia Tempest. She's a journalist and writer whose cerebral palsy means she relies on an electric wheelchair. Good morning, Anna. What's the reaction been to this payment from Anastasia and people you've been speaking to for this £150 disability living payment, cost of living payment?
Good morning. Yes, I'm here with Anastasia. She's seen her bills really skyrocket. Like you said, she's got cerebral palsy, and that means she uses a wheelchair that she needs to charge. It's an electric wheelchair, and she's seen the bills for a whole home go up to £5,000, and that's just something you've said that you can't afford. And
absolutely, Anna.
And what is this £150 payment going to do for you?
Well, it's not going to do anything. While I accept the £150, I do appreciate it. Like, there's also this £400, and I feel very irritated by the fact of hearing the word package. It's just not going to do anything at all. So the reality is very different. I don't want to exist. I actually want to live. Even go to okay, I might as well mention a name. I like Costa. You know, going to have coffee in Costa is extremely difficult. I don't just want to exist. And what's all this resilience doesn't actually put money in my pocket. And I think the cost of living is a much deeper issue. I mean, for example, we've got what's happening in Russia. That really does need sorting out. We've got the recession that's probably going to spill over to next year. So it's extremely difficult, and I don't get any social care even though I qualify. That social care needs sorting out. It's all very different in one part of the country. I've lived in many areas of the country. You go to one part of the country, there's there's a problem, and it all depends on who does the assessment, whether you get support or not. So the whole system is a complete and utter nightmare. I like Twitter, and I've sent a message to Liz Truss, you know, to try and encourage her and tell her what the reality is of my circumstances and other people. But people with disabilities, we're really at the bottom of the pile, and we don't have much of a voice. And I really appreciate you giving me a voice today, Anna.
Thank you, Anastasia. And if you could speak to the government, then there is this £150 one-off payment, but what more needs to be done? What would you say to them with this mini-budget coming up on Friday?
Well, we need to reduce VAT. We need actually more money. We can only be careful up to a point. I can only be careful up to a point. I'm not eating very well. I'm eating pastas and sandwiches. I've not. If you said to me, when was the last time you had a meal, I wouldn't be able to tell you. And I think when it comes to a disability, people with disabilities have always struggled well before the cost of living, and things are just going to get worse if somebody doesn't step in. And I really don't think having a Conservative government is that helpful, really.
Thank you for sharing your views with us there, Anastasia. Really appreciate that. And I'm sure our viewers will be contacting us all day on what they think with this £150 for up to 6 million people with disabilities and what's going to come out on that mini budget on Friday.
Thank you so much, Anna Riley, for bringing us that report, and also Anastasia for sharing your experiences there. Well, now joining us is a viewer of the channel and wheelchair user, Jack Milnes. Thank you so much for joining us on the programme. I mean, you use a wheelchair, so you are one of the individuals that will be in recipient of this payment. I mean, what do you think? Do you feel that it is enough, or do you think it nowhere near goes far enough, like our previous guest?
I don't know. I think every disabled person has different needs, and therefore for some £150 will go nowhere. Personally, I'm grateful for the money. It will help. It won't solve all the issues, but I would like to point out that also my personal independent payment has gone up by £5 a week, so that's £260 over the next year as well. So I'd like to be fair with the government, if you like. But I'm also taking steps to try to minimise my usage. I mean, my boiler has a preheat option on it. So if that's on, it heats up a reservoir of hot water so that when you turn the tap on, it comes through much quicker. That's on 24/7. So if you turn that off, it might take a little longer for the water to come through as hot. But when at night, it's not heating the water. Whereas if it is on, then you're heating water when you don't need to. So, I mean, there are some tips that we could use. I'm also very interested in the small business grants that might come out in October. I run a small charity here. We're looking at taking on a workshop, and whilst my home electricity bill is 26 pence per unit at the moment, that could double in the 1st of October with the cap being £2,500. But for the charity, we're looking at £1 per kilowatt hour, which is 4 times what I'm paying here at home. I'm with Bulb. They do 26 pence per unit. I don't know whether other disabled people have looked at alternative suppliers to see what the best bills are, whether they can get it reduced. So I don't know. I'm just grateful for any help from the government, to be honest. And I'm hoping that this mini budget will give us more hope as well in the future.
And just very finally, what kinds, you say you'd hope for more help in the future. What kinds of disability-specific help do you think the Chancellor should be looking at? Do you think there's something he can do perhaps with through the welfare system, through universal credit, which lots of disabled people already receive? Or, you know, what other sorts of things should he consider?
Well, I think maybe increase, certainly sort of for the mini budget and maybe the budget in April, look at increasing the payments to for personal independence payment. That is the main benefit of that disabled people get. Also, the carers payment. I mean, carers. I live alone, but I have people that will come here. Their costs are obviously increased because of fuel costs to get here if I need any help. So there are some things that they can look at doing, but I think the government's hands are really tied. There's so much going on, and there's so many people that need help, not just the disabled, but low income people. As I said, I run a charity which helps disadvantaged kids get into engineering. So I can see the sort of poverty where I live is one of the most deprived areas in the country. So, and also problems, as Anastasia was saying, with the councils across the country have different rules and different regulations. I mean, I've recently set up a Facebook group, Disabled Rights, to try to help people who aren't getting the right sort of support from the council.
Well, Jack, thank you for joining us. I know you joined us last week or the week before it would have been, and we'd love to speak to you again after Friday to see whether what the Chancellor has said does satisfy you. So please do come back. Jack Milnes there, a GB News viewer, and also a wheelchair user who will be receiving that £150 one-off payment.
No, it was very fascinating, some of the things that Jack was saying, even the sense that he's changing his consumption also, because that is part of the debate. On the one hand, people are saying we need more payments, but some economists are saying, well, more payments means that people aren't going to change their behaviour when we do have a supply problem as well. So it is a difficult balance to strike from the part of the government.
Yes. Well, let's finish off with the Ukraine and that UN General Assembly meeting that's taken place. Liz Truss is set to meet with US President Joe Biden and other world leaders as that United Nations General Assembly meeting takes place in New York.
Yes, in her first foreign trip as Prime Minister, Ms Truss will focus on the war in Ukraine and the global crisis in food security.
Yes, well, let's speak now to Ukrainian Parliament advisor Mykola Volkivsky. Mykola, we appreciate your time. What do you think should come out of this UN General Assembly meeting? Because this will be the first time these world leaders are meeting since Russia invaded Ukraine.
Of course, it's important. I can compare from the last year when it was held in the 76th General Assembly, because Ukrainian president was in person. He gave a powerful speech last year, and he also named the United Nations its retired superhero. It was during his speech, which was given to the UN last year. This year, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Dmytro Kuleba, is leading the Ukrainian delegation. We expected a lot of important bilateral talks between Ukrainian delegation and leaders of the states, because, the number one topic this year, Antonio Guterres said, it will be Ukrainian war in Ukraine. And also we expected some, private negotiations between Ukrainian delegation and also with UK delegation in United States, because the members of Ukrainian delegation, it's not just the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, it's also Ukrainian prosecutor, it's also Ukrainian representative in United Nations. And also this year, it will be like the first after 24th of February, after World started, the world leaders will be together, connected and talk and negotiate about the Ukraine in general.
Mykola, Liz Truss, our Prime Minister, will commit to spending at least £2.3 billion for the war effort in Ukraine in 2023. I mean, does this give you confidence that the UK, with this new Prime Minister, will continue to stand shoulder by shoulder with Ukraine?
Of course, we appreciate that. So for Ukrainian side, we say that a lot of help. It was given, a lot of supply, which was given by United Kingdom to Ukraine. That's something what we are like all the time. We say it's a powerful for our bilateral relations, because the Liz Truss said that she will continue this kind of dialogue with Ukraine, as was started since the war started with Boris Johnson. From this side, we totally support this kind of movements, and also we will see how it will be, develop this kind of dialogue between the United States, United Kingdom, and Ukraine in general, and how it will be developed. We also expected some talks between all of these delegations in a General Assembly. And also I know the Minister of Foreign Affairs, they prepared a powerful speech which was given this week in the General Assembly. And for example, by the way, I'm here in Geneva in 51st Human Rights Council. It also in United Nations in Geneva. And it was a lot of talks about the human rights in Ukraine and human rights with all of 193 delegations in United Nations in Geneva office. From this reason, we will see what about the results, if there will be any changes in any updates, what is going on in Ukraine. We hope for positive movements, of the results for Ukrainian side and the result of this United Nations 77th General Assembly.
Well, Mykola, thank you for joining us on the programme there to speak about what you would like to hear when those world leaders meet a bit later. Mykola Volkivsky, who's an advisor to the Ukrainian Parliament, and of course everything that will happen later on in that meeting, later over the next few days, we'll be bringing you live here on GB News all the coverage and all the analysis for what is said and done in that assembly.
Indeed, and we have some views on just all the different topics that we've been talking about. Many people praising Jack Milne, saying what a positive and pragmatic man Jack is. It is refreshing to hear somebody offering a positive way forward instead of just complaining, and I think that's always nice when we have solution-oriented. Obviously, Mykola has one perspective on the Ukraine conflict. Dave disagrees somewhat. He is saying that when will the question be asked about how far we are prepared to support Ukraine? Are the UK and Europe prepared to impoverish ourselves long-term to support the war? I think I do hear people putting that perspective forward, but at the end of the day, if Russia is controlling the energy supply of much of Europe and basically causing a conflict on European soil, that's going to cost us extensively regardless. And so best to see what we can do to support the end of the war as quickly as possible. Yeah,
that view shared by Lawrence here, who says quite firmly, how dare Truss send my tax money to Ukraine? He thinks it's throwing good money after bad, and it's actually put him off voting for the Conservatives ever again. He says he was actually a lifelong Conservative member, and it's that... It's trying to sort of sell to people the idea that actually there's a massive long-term interest in us sending so much money to Ukraine, billions and billions of pounds, because it's, what people can see at the moment is the tangible reality that they face, which is that they can't afford to pay their bills, this week, next month. They're struggling to put fuel in their cars, to eat food. And so when they're faced with that really immediate reality, trying to think about long-term global sort of diplomatic strategic efforts, it's a difficult thing to try and get them to see the importance of. But that's the case for the government. I agree. And I do think it is important to remember, though, that the energy crisis is long in the making. Whilst the Ukraine conflict has exacerbated it, successive governments have made decisions that has made it far, far worse. Yes, well, that's it from us here at To The Point. But don't go away, because up next is Gloria De Piero and Mark Longhurst. So stay with us for that. See you tomorrow.
Hello. Quite a lot of cloud around for many of us over the next couple of days. There will be some breaks in the cloud, allowing a little brightness to come through at times, but for the majority of us, it is a dry looking picture, and that's all thanks to this large area of high pressure dominating the weather across much of the UK, both today and through much of the rest of the week. But there is a change coming. This weather front, which is bringing thicker cloud and outbreaks of rain to the far north and northwest of Scotland, will eventually make progress southeastwards, but not until the latter part of the week. Until then, it's a largely dry picture, quite a lot of cloud around for many of us, and that cloud just about thick thick enough to produce a few light drizzly showers here and there, but that's the exception rather than the rule. And as I mentioned, there will be some breaks in the cloud at times, so a little bit of brightness here and there. And it's more of the same through this evening and overnight. Still a good deal of cloud around, still a largely dry picture, just some more persistent rain at times for the far northwest of Scotland. And actually that cloud might break up a little bit overnight tonight, but it will be a mild one. Temperatures for most of us remaining in double figures. And we could see a little bit of mist and fog developing, particularly so across parts of East Anglia and the south east of England. And that will be with us first thing tomorrow morning, eventually melting away once the sunshine gets going. But then for most of us, after a fairly bright start for many, will start to cloud over once again as the day progresses. Temperatures generally high teens or just about nudging into the low 20s, so feeling fairly pleasant if you do get a glimpse of that sunshine. And then, as I mentioned, this thicker cloud with outbreaks of rain associated with that weather front does start to make slow progress southeastwards later in the day tomorrow, and more especially on Thursday and Friday, but very slow progress indeed. So for some of us, we'll be underneath that cloud and rain, for others remaining dry. Bye for now.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation.
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England,
Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
On TV.
on radio, and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's
news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV,